Okay, welcome to The Way Back, a discussion of the film and TV industry in the COVID-19 era. This series is presented by Green Slate and produced by the Catch a Break podcast. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'm the SVP of West Coast Operations for Green Slate, and I'm the host for this, and I'm the host on the Catch a Break podcast. So the hot topic right now is how do we get back to work in the COVID era? And we're not saying post-COVID yet because we don't know when we're going to be in the post-COVID era. And for the moment, I think we're trying to figure out how to work alongside of the reality of COVID in a world where we still don't know very much and everything is still evolving. But what I do know is that a lot of very smart people are making plans and trying to figure it out. So what this series aims to do is to have some conversations with some very smart people and explore some of the questions. So today, this is the first in a series of 4 conversations we're going to have about this topic. And today the focus is the COVID-19 protocols. What will the new normal look like? We know that COVID-19 changes everything from on-set protocols to stories and how our production is going to adapt. And then what about the actors? And what kind of support is going to be put in place? And when we talk about a safe working environment for everyone, how do we not lose track of the progress that we've made over the last several years in the space of inclusion and diversity and discrimination? So I'd like to introduce today's panel. First, we have Jeanette Volturno. Jeanette is a producer and co-founder of Catchlight Studios, and she has produced 7 franchises. In 2012, Jeanette joined Blumhouse Productions as the head of production, where she worked on over 60 feature films, including Whiplash and Get Out. Prior to joining Blumhouse full-time, Jeanette worked as a line producer on the Paranormal Activity and the Insidious franchises. And it should be noted, Jeanette is also part of the Catch a Break podcast team. Welcome, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Malia Arrington is the executive director of the Hollywood Commission on Eliminating Sexual Harassment and Advancing Equality. Founded by Kathleen Kennedy and Nina Shaw and chaired by Anita Hill, the Hollywood Commission is devoted to defining and implementing best practices that eliminate sexual harassment and bias for all Hollywood workers, especially marginalized communities, and actively promoting a culture of accountability, respect, and equality. Welcome, Malia.
Thank you.
Nancy Nayor is a Los Angeles-based casting director with a company that casts projects across all platforms: film, television, network, streaming, reality, and more. Nancy works with established filmmakers such as Steven Spielberg, Ron Howard, Jason Blum, Spike Lee, Sam Raimi, and consistently casts projects for top studios and distributors from Netflix and Amazon to Sony, CBS, WB, Quibi, and more. All the people. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
And last, we have Sonya JF Barnett. She is Canada's only IPA-certified intimacy coordinator, and she has been working in the field of sexuality for over 10 years. Sonya recently completed a specialist degree in sexual diversity studies at the University of Toronto and is pursuing her master's degree in counseling psychology with a focus on sex therapy. She's currently working as the intimacy coordinator on Guillermo del Toro's upcoming feature film, Nightmare Alley, and also See, Season 2 for Apple TV+. Welcome, Sonya.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
This is quite a panel we have, and I'm so excited. This conversation is going to be really juicy. So this is how it's going to work. I've prepared some questions for our panel, which will hopefully lead to an open discussion, because even though this looks and feels like a webinar panel, it's also a podcast where we typically just have big conversations and everybody kind of jumps in. So we're going to do that as much as we can on this format, which is Zoom, which is a little awkward, but we still want to kind of get that feeling and really just talk to each other. And then also, if you are watching this on Zoom or on Facebook, you can submit questions on that platform, and our team is going to gather them and feed them into me so that we can include some of your questions in this. All right, is everybody ready?
All good. Let's
get into it. Our first burning question is for Jeanette. Now, I've just seen yesterday and today, state after state pushing out their protocols, and I've looked over a bunch of them, and a lot of them say a lot of the same things. But Jeanette, how are we going to get back to work, and when? What are the protocols looking like?
Well, Julie, thank you, and thank Green Slate for putting this together for us. It's great that we have this opportunity to talk about this. And it's not a clearly defined answer. It's very slowly and carefully. I like to say, we have respect and need to tippy-toe back into this, because each production will need to be evaluated for the scope and the size of what it is. We have to look at the questions on what the cast is, how many there are, where the locations are, what the background is, how complicated the story is, looking at company policies, these white pages that are coming out that are a partnership between the studios, the production companies, the unions, the cities, the organizations, the vendors that have all been diligently working together and gathering and comparing notes from all around the world. I have to say that's probably the thing that excites me the most, is the amount of people that have come together to try to help figure out the way forward. And that part I think is great. Rarely do that many companies and organizations and people partner together, but it changes on a daily basis, and the information evolves every hour. And so I think the thing to keep in mind is that productions need to be nimble and pivot. Probably the independents are most well suited to do this because they generally have shorter shoots with less people, and the complexities of the stories are not as intricate as the larger films. But the larger film and television shows, they have something that the indies don't, which is usually a studio behind them with annual insurance policies and broader umbrellas for the coverage. So while it may be harder to get and more risky to get the larger film and television shows up due to having people get sick and having to shut down and the cost of all of that, it'll be difficult for the indies to get started and get going because of trying to get insurance. So right now we're trying to have these conversations with the independents, working together with the insurance companies to come up with a plan that works for everyone, similar to what other countries are doing, where they're getting government involved and helping to back some of the insurance issues that are going on right now. We're hoping to have something like that where the indies can kind of band together and help in that. So we'll see if that comes to fruition and how that pans out. But definitely the first shows out the gate are going to be different and consistent in order for us to keep the ball moving. We're a global industry and we partner with people all over the world. And, you know, the nice thing is once we figure out the rules, we'll see innovation. So we're watching our friends in other countries move forward slowly and seeing what does and doesn't work. And we need to be fluid and take small steps and communicate a lot and adjust to things that come up. And it might be, you know, putting ourselves out there a little bit and then pulling back a little bit and readjusting and then doing it again until we can find that right balance. And we need to be responsible to our industry and the people that are vulnerable in it and our actors.
And it seems like a lot of the things that we're seeing are things they're telling us in normal life, like the social distancing and the cleaning of the things and the wearing of the PPE and all of those things that now we can all rattle off the top of our heads. And it seems like, okay, for the crew, you can have everyone in hazmat suits, you know, walking around the set. But then it seems like that the variable is the actors. You can't have them in hazmat suits. Are they even going to want to walk into this environment? It seems really risky for them. So Nancy, I want to bring you in. How has this changed? What's your perspective on kind of how the actors are looking at it? And also as a casting director, how has it changed how you've worked? How are you finding chemistry between people? How are you casting projects? Like, are you still doing that work now? Or?
Well, we've often, because of, you know, geographical, you know, boundaries, we've had to cast remotely and we've had to have actors self-tape and do Skype, you know, sessions with directors and do Skype chemistry sessions. So that process has always existed. It was never really, you know, our ideal. We always loved getting people in a room together. There's nothing quite like that, but we have worked the other way. And if we need to do that more, which it seems like we will, you know, we're able to, and we're certainly willing to do whatever we need to do in the new environment. And, you know, one thing, actors love to act. And I feel from my discussions with the agents and managers recently, their actors want to get back to work. There's definitely that creative and emotional wanting. And like Jeanette said, the new rules are unfolding. The new safety guidelines are just, you know, evolving. And so I think everyone has a different level of risk tolerance, health issues. You know, I think it'll be each individual project's, you know, sort of new way of approaching things will also be dependent on what the roles are, what the actor's receptivity is at any given day, because as Jeanette said, it changes day to day. So I think generally actors want to get back on sets, absolutely. And we will find these new ways, whether it's testing, quarantining, sequestering. I think generally people don't want to get on planes. So I think there's more of a tendency to want to work in your backyard if you can and go home at night. In your neighborhood that you can shoot, I think that's better and ideal. And I also think content is going to be rewritten to create distances between people. I just don't think there's going to be as many crowd scenes, obviously, and close contact as there was. I think content will be adjusted accordingly, and then actors will feel safer.
Yeah, it seems like background actors may be having a long, tough go of it when we're looking. And I remember when we were talking earlier, one of the things you said, like, it was real when an actor was offered, they were going to travel them, but they wouldn't even accept a private flight.
Yeah, they were offered they wanted to do a project in Vancouver and they would need to be flown from LA. And we were told, well, they're nervous to get on the flight. And we offered a private jet ride and they said they're actually nervous about that too. And then we were like, oh man, we're in trouble. I think we realized we were all in trouble when Tom Hanks, announced he had COVID. That was sort of a watershed moment for the industry because he's one of the people, the golden boy you think will never, he's untouchable. And he went through this. And I think that stopped us all in our tracks, as did someone turning down private jet rides. That doesn't happen all the time, but it did.
Yeah, on the upside, Tom Hanks can probably work. So everyone will be casting Tom Hanks for the next year and shooting Castaway again. Yeah. Okay, Sonya, why don't you jump in on this? Because let's talk about the making actors safe and what kind of testing and how is this going to change your role? Is it going to expand it? Is it going to contract it? Because no one's kissing for a year. What are you looking at?
Well, there are different conversations happening all over the place. And on one side, we have people saying that we're going to have a complete loss of intimacy. I'm actually more in the other camp where after all this, we're going to be starving for intimate content. And of course, there's going to be stories where COVID plays a character itself. But we don't want to have our escape entertainment to reflect what we've already been going through. And, there's real teeth to the statement that says sex sells. So it may be a long time coming for those kind of intimate scenes, but I don't see the complete elimination of them, at least not for the long term, maybe for the short term. But once it does come back, the protocols will become quite strict. Like they're already quite strict already. We make sure that everybody is already safe when there's skin-to-skin contact. We worry about those kinds of things. We have barriers in place, STI protections, those kinds of things. But on the daily, we're probably going to be looking at daily temperature testing, rapid testing when it ever comes. Limited crew contact, as Nancy was saying, quarantining, isolating cast that has worked together or are even couples already in real life. They may be cast as those intimate partners. Riders will certainly have different language. My intimacy kit will already be including gloves, masks, hand sanitizer, those kinds of things. So it's one of those things where nothing is safe. Like a lot of people will use the term safe sex, but even that, there's no such thing as safe sex. It's always safer sex. So we're going to have safer sets, not safe sets. There's a risk there. There's always going to be a risk involved. And it's not just intimacy. There's physical risk on a set at any moment. But we are going to be a lot more demanding of protocols, those safeties put in place. We're going to have consistency within the departments, things like the intimacy department, hair and makeup, wardrobe, those kinds of things. We all have to be talking to each other to make sure that the protocols that are put in place are carried throughout the whole production and set to set. We can't risk having one lax production part and then the whole thing crumbles after that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if because your role on set, and I've had intimacy coordinators tell me often everyone will come to you like kind of as a therapist, hey, can I talk about this? Because you're in that position, seems very inviting to people, I would assume. It's as we shoot, because we shoot all over the country, and we're watching every state behave very differently culturally as regards to this. And so I think it's going to be very important if you have people, let's say from LA, where everyone's wearing a mask outside, go shoot in some state where nobody's wearing a mask and everything's open and it's no big deal. People are really going to have to speak up and advocate for themselves for safety and protection. Do you see like someone like you having a role in helping people to do that?
I can see a bit of it. I would see that more falling on already the safety advisors that are there for set. They're really going to be the ones that are going to be carrying the brunt of that information, and they should really, in my opinion. But I can be there for the mental health of people, like for those people that have come out of quarantine and not seen their families for so many days in order just to work. Younger people who have no experience doing intimate scenes and are thrust into a more dangerous setting. We will be there as an IC. We will be there to try and help calm some nerves, that's for sure.
Now, Jeanette, when you hear all about daily testing and sequester and quarantine and PPE, are you doing math?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a cost and there's a time factor to it as well. The days probably won't be as long. There's going to be breaks that are going to have to be given so that people can take masks off and, feel normal and breathe normal air and, take a break on things. So it's definitely going to change the way that production is scheduled, the way that it's budgeted, the way that the complexity of how many people and the location that you're at. And yeah, it's definitely a number crunch.
And actually, that will affect casting too, in the sense that if someone has to travel to location, and usually you want to board them so that, let's say, for a larger name or prominent cameo appearance in a film, the idea was to have them come in and out quickly. That's not going to be necessarily an option as easily, and so that will affect, possibly who will accept certain roles at this point.
Correct. And at this point, right now, they're looking at 2-week quarantines in a lot of places. So even some states, some countries, some places, if you're traveling any small amount of cast or crew, just a couple people, they still have to quarantine right now. So as those rules relax and as everybody gets on the same page, I think one of the nice things about the white pages coming out, which is this, effort by the studios and unions and companies to come together and people day play between different studios and different production companies. And so if you're working for one company one day and you go and work the next company for another couple days, if they're not on the same page with the same rules, there's a problem. And nobody wants to have multiple rules and tests to go over all of the time, and it might change and shift. So it'd be great. We're all on the same page.
Makes all the scheduling so tricky. Malia, I want to bring you into this. We're doing a lot of talking about safe sets, and we're really talking about it in an infectious disease sort of sense. But I know that you're also very involved in making sure that the definition of safe set includes things like harassment and inclusion, especially if we're changing how people work and creating different environments. Is there any danger? Of course there's danger, but I wanted to talk about because everyone is shut down. We've created scarcity. Right? So there's going to be a rush back to work. People are just going to be hiring fast and furious. Is there any danger of us losing some of the ground we've made with inclusion and diversity? Is there any new danger of discrimination, do you think, that we really just need to keep top of mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there have certainly been gains with respect to awareness. And I think there have been significant symbols of that change. For example, the Weinstein conviction. I don't think, however, that we've made lasting cultural change, and I don't think that we're done, right? We continue at the Hollywood Commission to hear, a range of stories that, involve the name calling and the off-color comments and the lewd jokes, with the perception that there's really no accountability for bad behavior, particularly those high-value employees. In that respect, we know that the entertainment industry is a high-risk environment for harassment and discrimination to begin with, right? And the everyday, pre-COVID era, it was always a high-risk environment because when you have a homogenous workforce, that is a risk factor for harassment. And when you've got a workplace where some employees really don't conform to the workplace norms, also a risk factor, right? And we hear that all the time, where there's this sense of creative exceptionalism, right? So not everyone has to conform. They're really creative. This is just the way they work. And you accept them from those workplace norms. And again, we've got workplaces with high value employees that they're seen as too valuable, essentially, to hold accountable. And then you've got significant power disparities and isolated workplaces. So I think really these issues and these risk factors will really only be exacerbated by the COVID environment, because what you're going to see, and what we do see, is when you've got such a significant number of individuals who are without employment, that creates a massive economic desperation and vulnerability, which increases the power imbalances. And it really does put people in a position where they are exceptionally vulnerable and, far more likely, unfortunately, to be subject to behavior that we would otherwise not consider in any way, shape, or form acceptable. So I think that it is absolutely possible that the efforts with respect to sexual harassment could lose ground. I think that diversity and inclusion efforts could lose ground, where you see situations where certain demographics aren't hired because they're viewed as being part of a vulnerable population. So I think there are a lot of questions around making sure that when we're thinking about safety, we're not just thinking about safety from infectious disease, we're thinking about the safety from physical and emotional harm that comes with harassment and discrimination. And so we really need to make sure that addressing discrimination and harassment remains a priority, even as we triage the new issues that we're looking at.
Yeah, it's so much to think about and unpack. I want to talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of it. Like, if someone is going down a list of who are we going to hire this particular job, and I don't know if this happens. I assume this could happen. In the interest of time, people go look, oh no, that person's over 60. They're too vulnerable. To protect them, I'm not going to invite them on this job. This person, is a person of color who's also older. Wow, they're really vulnerable. Let me not even call. Let me just move down my list. And without thinking, I'm discriminating, but without also asking the question, how do we combat that besides just stopping it and calling everybody and offering it to them?
Yeah, I think to your point, the first key is really just making sure that you're aware of that possibility, right? So that people are aware of their thinking and the disparate impact it has on populations who, quite frankly, aren't particularly well represented to begin with, whether that's people in an older age category who, we don't see in writers' rooms very often, or people who we don't typically see in front of the camera or behind the camera. So I think, number one, awareness is the first issue. And I think the second one is making sure that, you're having those conversations as opposed to just making assumptions for somebody else on their behalf. And then finally, it's making sure that you are making an effort to diversify those people you're bringing back and thinking about how those practices, whether it's sequestering for X number of days, who can accept those conditions. Because in a lot of cases, accepting a condition where you're sequestering for 14 days is not workable for a large portion of our population that is parenting from home, or they have dependents, or they're caring for others who have vulnerabilities. And that, I think we've all come to understand, probably falls disproportionately on women, right? So how are we restructuring the return to work so that it doesn't have a disparate impact? And then again, there are always ways that you can look to diversify the folks that you are hiring. And there are some great tools out there that allow people to look for a diverse cast and crew, no matter where they are, like Cruvy and some other great tools. So I think it's really important for people to take advantage of those and be really thoughtful about it.
I think it's important to keep it top of mind and to make an effort every single time. I mean, I remember when the fight was, if someone's pregnant, you just don't even think about hiring them. Well, why don't you ask them if they can still work, or just offer them the job and wait and see. Let people make those decisions. Anita Hill came out with a beautiful op-ed in Variety last week. She covered a lot of things that you just said, but was there anything else you wanted to highlight from that piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just anytime people are thinking about their discrimination and harassment policies, you're always designing that around the risk factors that are created by certain practices, right? So, for example, one of the things that you're typically trying to develop practices around is reducing the opportunity to have people in isolated workspaces, right? Because isolation removes the opportunity for witnessing some behavior that's problematic. So while we certainly understand that the return to work, the return to a set is no doubt going to mean a reduced number of people in the set, it's around designing policies to prevent that isolation in a way that's dangerous. So revise the policies, take a look at the new practices that you're implementing, think about the risks that those are creating, and then design your additional efforts around those risks.
Great.
I thought it was interesting also when Sonya was saying about, do people want to see what they've been going through now? And, a lot of what people are going through is isolation. So I do think scripts will be restructured to be like Castaway, like Gravity. So there are situations where content will be designed to create a more isolated environment, and perhaps we'll discover people don't want to see that, but perhaps we'll also discover that people will relate to it because they've been going through it. So it's too early to tell, I think. But I do think people will want to get back to, larger sets and more social environments as soon as they can, as soon as it's safe. So hopefully that will solve what you were addressing, Malia.
So then switching gears a little bit, Jeanette, it was announced last week that you're going to be shooting Songbird in 4 short weeks. And I know you can't tell us everything, but what can you tell us up until the point where you'd have to kill us all about your plans for that shoot, whether it's story or protocols? How are you guys going to do it?
Right. So Adam Goodman's company, Invisible Narratives, asked Catchlight to partner with them on a very cool story that they were developing that would not only capture the time that we're in, but would be able to shoot in it. And it's a love story. It's set in Los Angeles. It's slightly in the future. Like we did pioneering with the found footage style on Paranormal Activity, we've come up with a new style of filmmaking, and we're really excited about exploring it and telling stories through it. I can tell you it's not about watching through Zoom with actors on monitors. It's not the intention of it. And our crew members are very much filmmakers in their own right, and we're partnering with them. And we believe as filmmakers that it's our responsibility in these times to find a way forward and to safely create. So we're planning on operating as solitary units that are simultaneously functioning as a cohesive team. And I like to think of it as sort of like the special ops team that goes in before the full military lands and sets up camp. And we're testing out the water and making sure that the coast is clear. And at the same time, we're working with the unions to make sure that we're within the partnership of the contracts and that the balance is right. And it's been really fun to try and figure out a new way of doing something with the restrictions that we have and with the people that we're doing this with. So I'm excited to see what comes out of it and telling the story.
Well, producers are all about puzzles, right? Your whole job is figuring out the puzzle, and now it's how refreshing, a whole brand new puzzle to figure out on top of the puzzle you've always had.
Tool in our chest, yes.
Okay, you guys want to take some questions from the audience? From Susan Papa via, I think, Facebook. As an independent producer and actor making ULB and MLB, ultra low budget and micro low budget, maybe? I'm sure you guys know what that means. SAG-AFTRA films. I'm reading and hearing a lot about how the studio-supported projects will adjust to the new COVID-19 safety protocols. Many of these, such as a 14-day quarantine period for all cast and crew, won't be feasible at our budget level. What can be done to address the issues facing the thousands of filmmakers trying to build careers and get into the bigger tiers when they just don't have the money to do everything that we're talking about here?
Right. There are other ways of approaching filmmaking by creating a plan based on the story of what it is that you're filming. So I would figure out what you're filming, where you're going to film it, with whom you're going to film it, and then put a plan together, and then talk to your crew, and then talk to your unions and talk to your city officials, and have them help you refine that plan so that everybody feels safe with it and then move forward. And there are very creative ways around doing that. And it's not a one cookie cutter style fits all. I think everything has to be thought of individually and researched, because there's so many different ways of doing things. And if you do it more as a cohesive unit and figuring it out all together, then you'll find yourself with a plan that people will back and get on board with, and you'll have a safe shoot. You'll have your odds of moving forward with a safe shoot are much greater.
Anyone else have anything to add to that?
I was thinking that, at this moment in time, I think actors are very generous. I mean, I think they have this spirit of wanting to see film come back. And so I think there will be actors who will be perhaps affordable at different budget ranges than they might have been before, because they have the spirit of wanting us to move forward, and they have a generosity of spirit of perhaps participating in productions at a budget level they might not have prior, if they respond to the material. So I think it's a great time to reach out to actors that you might think were ungettable. You never know. If the material is great, this is a time where people are more interested in a bigger picture than necessarily their next specific paycheck. If they can afford to be generous, I think they will be.
I mean, just look at all the amazing cameos we've seen on Zoom things and Facebook things over the last couple months.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I jump in here as well? If for those in the ultra low budget field, as an intimacy coordinator, our role isn't in Canada and not in the States either, actually. We're not a mandated position. And though we would like to be, there are some of us who would still like to see intimacy done safely for the cast and crew as well. So I even though I can work on a large scale film or series, I also make myself available to those lower budgets, especially those in the queer communities and in the film communities that are led by people of color. Those people are often discriminated against, left out of the bigger budget productions. So I will put my name out there and say, look, if you need somebody to help with intimacy, just give me a call and I'll see what I can do for you. And in this age, I'll give my best to give you the safer way of doing those kind of intimate scenes. Just there are those of us in the industry along all crew members that we just want to see a production done well and safely, and we'll happily consult. So, reach out, always reach out. The worst answer you'll get is no.
Incredibly generous. I love it. All right, here's another question from Susie on Zoom. Why can't producers evaluate whether their productions will go up on a case-by-case basis? For example, if their lead actor is a known germaphobe, why can't they just admit that they want to wait for a vaccine? Why an all or nothing approach?
Well, I wasn't thinking we were actually approaching an all or nothing approach. I feel it's so individual to every project and every actor. Like, we used to have a list of questions when we would start casting that would be, as we talk to agents, is your actor available? Are they professionally available? Are they personally available? And now are they receptive to the particular size project? Now the list of questions is like 20 questions long. Are they on an island, sort of waiting out the whole process till there's a vaccine? Are they feeling restless? Are they excited? Are they daring? Are they ready to go to work? Are they ready to be on a set? What's their risk tolerance? What's their fear factor? I mean, we have different, more detailed conversations. So I don't think there's a one size fits all from this point forward. There never really was, but it's even more sort of personal now to everyone's comfort level. I think we're very sensitive to that in all these arenas.
So you have even more vetting to do before anyone even gets put in front of producers.
Yes.
You've gone through that whole list.
Yes.
And
Yeah. People are happy to share. I think it's weird, strangely, although we're socially isolated, I think it's a more intimate time in a lot of ways. I think people feel that universality of what everyone's going through, and they're willing to share more personal feelings and thoughts about what's happening, and give more detailed answers because of people's personal experiences. It just feels more personal than ever. It's business, but it's also in getting the answers that I feel we need to those questions. People share more intimate details of what's really happening with their clients.
Well, isn't that what's happened across all of business also? Because we're all, as much as people can, they're working at home, but now people who are working at home are all in each other's living rooms and having a lot more details about their personal lives, even though you're on a work meeting. Like it seems to have added a layer of intimacy just to everybody's interaction because we're all in this weird boat together.
Yeah, I recently actually read an article about that and how we're so trained to be the professional at all times when we're at work. And, there's language that you have to use and you have to appear in a certain way and you can't discuss family and your kids can't show up in the back of the Zoom video like that British politician did a couple of years ago. People went wild over that kind of thing, but we're all human. And I think we'd be a lot more comfortable and a bit more productive if we're allowed to be human, especially when we're in our own home setting. So let somebody show up, without the lipstick, don't show up naked, but realize that they're surrounded by home and family. We have to drop those really strict professional protocols that says we have to appear in a certain way. We have to be productive in a certain way. We're just all human.
That's so interesting. And it's making me think, and Malia, you may have an opinion about this too. It's, forever, the workplace culture was set for the white men who created workplace culture, and then everyone else had to put on a mask and kind of fit into that. I wonder if this is an opportunity to forge a new way forward to work for everybody so that everybody's perspective and culture and how they work can be included. I wonder if it's a unique opportunity for that.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity really to rethink and reset in that respect. And, part of what I think everybody is looking for from the work environment is it's not just getting hired, right? When you get hired, you want to be seen for you and you want your voice included as you are, right? It's that notion of authenticity and really being included and valued in the conversation in a way that is authentic to you and not trying to imitate some other version of appropriate workplace protocol that may or may not speak to you and may or may not see you, right? So I think there's this really phenomenal opportunity to create and rebuild better, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's
a great reset.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how do we figure out what professional looks like while being really authentic? I mean, it's what Oprah's been telling us forever, right? But Nancy, did you want to say something else?
No, it reminded me. I mean, I always used to have a sign in my office during flu season, like, it's flu season, and I'd have like shaking hands in a circle with a line through it because I was like, it's germ warfare out there. I mean, this is just on an average flu season. And I thought, am I being cold by not, wanting to shake hands with every actor? We would see a lot of actors, in 1 week. And I thought, let's just protect each other and not necessarily, have that personal contact. And now I see that, it's not inappropriate to sort of have these safety boundaries, but I think, we're still feeling closer, as a result of all of this, and we'll still find ways to have a closeness. That's the goal too.
Okay, more questions from the internet. A couple of writer questions I'm going to combine from Crystal and from Sarah. Do you think writers will be asked to minimize day players in smaller parts? And also, as a screenwriter, the things that seem obvious are writing to smaller casts, less background, all of that is necessary. But what is not so obvious that I may not be thinking about that, I think from a production point of view that you should be thinking about as you're writing scripts right now?
Yes. The first ones out the gate, the first few out the gate, it'll be a lot easier for them to get greenlit and come up with a production plan that everyone can get behind. If it has a smaller footprint with smaller cast, with smaller amounts of locations, if it's less complicated to make, because the crews and the companies need to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And you got to remember, like when this all happened and everything shut down, we were at the peak of our industry, creating more content than we've ever created before. And some people walked away and left stuff on stages. They haven't even like picked that up yet. So when the gates open back up and people are clear to move faster than the first few projects out, the jockeying for stages, for equipment, for all of that is going to be and cast, trying to get everybody's schedules to line back up, and key crew and all of that is going to be very challenging. It's going to be a giant jigsaw puzzle. So the first few that are going to go have to be a more simplistic tone. Once we get our wheels going and a little bit underneath us and the skies clear a little bit and the governments around the world say that we can, ease up and we've fought this back, then the more complicated stuff can come into play and the stories can weave back in some of the more challenging elements to a production that require more people and bigger background and sets and all of that stuff. Yeah.
Anyone else on that one? Okay, we're getting a lot of questions about quarantine versus testing. Norm and Blair were both asking, do we think testing could eliminate like a 14-day quarantine approach? And does quarantine seem like the best option for cast and crew? Do you quarantine them all and before they go to prep or in prep? Do you guys have any idea how that might work?
Everyone's waiting for the tests because it's so much easier to do that, and nobody wants to be in a quarantine. And I honestly don't know if the quarantine would really work completely because you still have outside elements coming into it unless you're completely on an island that you've shipped everything to and sprayed it all down and nobody comes into that. There's still access of stuff that happens every day that are coming into contact, even if you're all staying at Airbnbs or a hotel or on a campus or whatever the case may be. So I don't think daily testing is going to be something that's tolerated by people a lot. And I think it's really going to be a partnership of being on your honor to do your best as an individual person, to be as conscious as possible to the world around you, to the people that you're working with, to sanitize, to wear your mask, to go home and properly dispose of things, to really, really remember that you are a piece of this microcosmic world, and all of those pieces are blending together, and if you don't do your part, it can literally grind to a halt again.
Yeah, talk about accountability and ethics.
Yeah.
I would have a sense, although I don't know that this will happen, but that people will maybe be signing riders, committing to following the procedures, because you can have a document that says this is what we're all doing, but if individuals don't agree to that, those guidelines, then, as you said, Jeanette, that one person can cause the whole thing to topple. So, I would think people would have to commit to a dedication to following those rules, not just accept a job and then say, well, I personally don't feel like, following later. Once you're at a location, that's going to create a problem.
Yeah, and I think we need to find a kind way of helping people do that. Production can supply all of the stuff, but your coworker that's next to you, if you see that they're having a mentally down day, help them. Help them, because it's in those times when you're not paying attention to that stuff that you forget to put your mask back on, or you go and pick up somebody else's drink, or whatever it is. Like and if you're just showing a little kindness and realizing that we are literally all in this together, then I think it'll help in the roads that we're paving going forward with all areas.
I'm hoping that rapid testing becomes something that is easy enough, fast enough, simple enough to administer. The porn industry has been going through that kind of constant testing for years, and it's just kind of a given that performers have to test. And, porn and sex workers, I'll say are probably some of the safest people that you could ever have sex with, because they're very, very conscious about their safety and, their personal sexual health. So if you've got a rapid test that isn't so invasive, certainly not as invasive as something like an STI test, for the sex work world. But if it's, if it's a swab that we can handle and it takes 30 minutes, I personally wouldn't find an issue with that. And if it's a matter of people who are being intimate, I really would like to think that the performers themselves would be okay with it, because it also helps their own safety. And it's a lot of people to test on a set. I was on a show that probably had on one given day 1,000 people on set, and that's a lot, especially if you're dealing with background. So if we can get that rapid testing, who knows when that's going to happen. Ontario itself has a real problem with it right now. We were contracted to get some, and then the manufacturer actually screwed up with it. And so that's gone back to the drawing board. So we're waiting. But if that happens at some point, other than being reliant on people saying, oh yes, I sequestered, but if you're looking at like Trinity Bellwoods Park in Toronto, or some of the beaches, from what I understand, in California, or the pools, the giant pool centers, people are they want to get out and about, and they're going to go socialize. And it really does take one person to break that entire production chain. So if we have that accountability with the test, I think production would be beneficial to rely on those things instead of just somebody saying, oh yeah, I was fine this weekend.
Yeah, I agree. The tests are much better than the quarantining. I don't think people it takes a certain person, to your point, Malia, that there are people with families and people who are, raising kids on their own, and, whatever that case may be. It's very difficult to be that person that can quarantine with a crew for a couple of weeks and take that job, so the rapid testing is definitely something that we hope that they come out with sooner rather than later.
Yeah, especially since there's so many discussions around that's going to be the thing that does it, right? But do we have it? Like, it's, it's not here yet. So we're going to have to see. Sonya, there's another question that I think is for you, from Amanda. There are a lot of studies about the effects of isolation and reintegration on mental and physical health. So we're going to be dealing with that as we go back to work also. Do you have any recommendations for?
I would say, go to your unions, your film organizations. A lot of them will have resources for you to access. ACTRA Toronto has a very good resource list for those kind of situations. I know in Canada that the crisis text line had an influx of calls because people were really feeling in mental health crisis. So I went through training and I became a crisis text line responder so I could help with that load. And there are people really, really feeling the isolation. Some people will say, oh, I'm fine just staying at home. But a lot of people aren't. And for some people, being at home is a really dangerous place. If you're queer or if there's domestic abuse, being at home is not a good thing for a lot of people. So we really do need those mental health resources. So go out to your city websites, to your community portals, to your actors unions, your guilds and stuff like that, and see if they do have resources for those kind of mental health access.
Okay, one more Facebook question from Tina. I'm in the pitch phase of a feature script with a very small cast and crew, yet intimacy is a main theme. Do you think it's best to hold back a few more months or until a vaccine before bringing it back on the table? Like, is now the time to be pitching the small, intimate movie?
I would say not. I don't want to be the first one out of the gate. I would love to work. Both my husband and I work in film, so we are completely down and trying to figure out how we're going to pay our mortgage come fall. And I would love to be back at work. But I also don't want to be the guinea pig. I don't want to rush into something because we don't have the proper information yet. And as we were saying before, information is changing every single day. We're getting conflicting reports. We're getting second waves coming in. So I think we need to be safer about that kind of intimate contact. Production can happen with gloves and restricting size, crew size and stuff like that. But if you want to be, kissing somebody in front of the camera, I don't think that's a good idea anytime soon. A lot of people were saying pre-prep in the summer and production up in the fall. I wouldn't say that for intimate settings at all. So if you're gonna write an intimate scene, again, it's going to be one of those things where COVID is the character, or it's like, we're sexting, you're sexting your characters. That can still be really steamy if your characters are sexy. We already see it sometimes in productions where people are on Tinder or they're chatting each other, and it's like, and it gets really hot and heavy. Utilize those kind of tools.
It's going to be back where in the olden days of film, like the sexiest scene was where they didn't kiss each other, like in It's a Wonderful Life with the record player and Mary.
Yeah.
Okay, we are at the point where on the podcast we call it our martini shot, and all you production people know that's the last shot of the day. So I'm going to ask you guys one question to leave us with, and that is, what gives you hope right now?
All right. Well, I mean, we're a creative industry, and we're going to come up with creative ways and interesting ways to do things and to move forward. And when jobs get reduced, there are other opportunities for new jobs. So you have to keep that in mind when your particular area in this industry is shrinking. There are other areas and other opportunities that I would look towards and try to reinvent something that's there, because telling stories is going to stay around. This industry is going to stay around. There's very inspiring things that come out of adversity in amazing storytelling and in innovation. And that part, I think, is what gives me hope, is what's coming out of this and how we as a nation adjusted when this all went down. The amount of outpouring that the people in this industry gave, from food to masks to medical supplies. We're a little mobile army unit, and we just work together and operate well as a team, and that's what we do, and we'll figure out a way through this, and it'll be cool. Might not see it now, but it will be.
Malia, do you have hope for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that along the same lines, I think that there's this real opportunity to, and I think I've seen it, where we are valuing everyone who is so critical to making a production happen, right? And it's making sure that those people are seen and they are valued, and you know how important they are to supporting the work that you're doing. And I think that if anything, there's this really big opportunity to say to people, when you return to work, it is going to be a better workplace, right? We are rebuilding towards a better workplace, one that is taking all safety considerations into account, and one that truly values, who you are and what you're bringing to the conversation, and is willing to include that. So I'm really hopeful that the return to work is a better return.
Great. Sonya, how about you?
I would say that, I'm very hopeful because intimacy is adaptable. If one of the things that many of us learned out of the AIDS health crisis back in the 80s and 90s, which, was another completely preventable crisis, is that it really redefined what sex looked like for a lot of people. And intimacy doesn't have to be eliminated. We just have to adjust our behaviors around it. It's a lot of people need to be intimate, and whether it's a hug or just, telling somebody that I see you, it goes a long way. So we really need to rely on our other senses and our other tools to express the same feelings. And I think that people can do it.
Nancy, you get our last word of hope.
Well, I'm very hopeful, that actors want to be back on sets because they've chosen the acting profession because they're a passionate bunch, and they're open to finding creative ways to work around the current environment because they want to follow that passion. And I think the entire world is, I feel, more vulnerable, more emotional, more sensitive than ever, and as Jeanette said, wants to tell beautiful stories about what's happening and move forward. And I feel that buzz in the community. I feel like there's a dedication to a new world, a new way of doing things in the current environment, and having film and television and creativity survive and flourish.
You guys, that all sounds so good. You all made me feel so much better. All right, that's our we're going to end it for today. I want to thank all of our panelists, Jeanette Volturno, Malia Arrington, Sonya JF Barnett, and Nancy Nayor. Thanks to all of you. And thank you to Green Slate for being the presenting sponsor of this series. You can find us at gslate.com, and also the Catch a Break podcast for producing it. You can find us at catchabreakpodcast.com. Join us at the same time next week when our guests are going to include producers from various genres, plus the executive director of the California Film Commission, to talk about what kind of productions might be able to come back first and how. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.